When we speak about the end of Abu Jahl, we cannot begin at the battlefield. We must begin with the heart. Because before Abu Jahl was defeated in Badr, he was already defeated by his own arrogance. He was not an ignorant man in the simple sense of the word. He was not a man who did not understand what was happening around him. In fact, Abu Jahl knew exactly who Muhammad was. He knew his truthfulness, he knew his honesty, he knew that this was the same man whom Makkah had trusted for years, the one they called Al-Amin, the trustworthy. He knew that the messenger was not a liar, not a madman, not a fabricator, and yet, even with that knowledge, he chose opposition. Why? Because sometimes the greatest barrier between a person and guidance is not lack of evidence. It is pride. It is ego. It is the refusal to humble oneself before the truth. Abu Jahl saw Islam not just as a new religion, but as a threat to his authority, his prestige, his social standing, his control over Quraysh. He could not bear the idea that revelation had come to Muhammad and not to him. He could not tolerate that the one he considered beneath his tribal rank had been chosen by Allah. And so his heart became a prison of jealousy and arrogance. This is why Abu Jahl becomes more than just one man in history. He becomes a symbol. He represents every soul that recognizes truth, but rejects it because submission feels heavier than disbelief. He represents the disease of kibr, the disease of arrogance, the same disease that destroyed Iblis when he was commanded to bow to Adam. Abu Jahl did not merely reject a message. He rejected what that message demanded from him: humility, surrender, and the admission that he was not the center of the world. And this is a terrifying lesson for all of us, because a person can be intelligent and still be misguided. A person can understand facts and still be spiritually blind. A person can see signs with his eyes and still reject them with his heart. Abu Jahl had proximity to the truth, but he lacked the humility to accept it. He heard the Quran, but he refused to let it penetrate his soul. He witnessed the character of the Prophet, but his pride was louder than his conscience. And so before he became the enemy of the Muslims, he became the captive of his own ego. Before he fell on the sands of Badr, he had already fallen in front of the truth. And that is the first lesson. When arrogance enters the heart, even the clearest truth can be rejected. And once that arrogance settled in his heart, it did not remain hidden. Arrogance never stays private for long. It eventually shows itself in action. And in the case of Abu Jahl, it showed itself in some of the darkest moments of the early Maccan period. Because when a person rejects the truth and then sees that truth continuing to spread, the rejection often turns into rage, and that rage, if left unchecked, becomes Arabic. Thought Arabic, lam Arabic, meme, it becomes cruelty, it becomes oppression, and that is exactly what happened with Abu Jahl. He was not content to simply disbelieve in the message of the Prophet He was not content to walk away and say, "I do not accept this." No. He made it his mission to crush the message and to break the people who carried it. He used his status, his influence, his voice, and his position among Quraysh to make life unbearable for those who had believed. He targeted the weak, because tyrants always begin with those they think cannot defend themselves. He targeted the slaves, the poor, the vulnerable, the ones with no tribal protection, the ones whose only shield was their faith in Allah. And what do we see in those early days? We see believers being tortured under the burning sun. We see families being humiliated. We see men and women whose only crime was to say, "Our Lord is Allah." And among the names connected to this oppression, the name of Abu Jahl appears again and again, not because he was merely present, but because he embodied the spirit of persecution. He was among those who wanted to make an example out of the believers to send a message to Makkah. If you follow Muhammad this is what awaits you. And yet, look at the irony. Abu Jahl thought he was extinguishing Islam, but in reality, he was exposing his own moral bankruptcy. He thought he was humiliating the believers, but history would remember the believers with honor and remember him with disgrace. He believed power was measured by how much pain he could inflict, but true power was in the hearts of those men and women who remained firm while being tortured, who refused to abandon their shahada even when their bodies were broken. That is where real strength was, not in the hand that struck, but in the heart that remained patient. And then there was his hostility toward the prophet letter F.D.A. himself. This was not just political opposition. This was personal hatred fueled by spiritual blindness. He mocked, insulted, and plotted. He tried to publicly disgrace the messenger of Allah letter F.D.F.A., hoping that ridicule would weaken what arguments could not defeat. But every insult only elevated the prophet letter F.D.F.A. in the sight of the believers, and every scheme only deepened the contrast between prophetic mercy and pagan cruelty. This is what tyranny always fails to understand. It believes that pain can silence truth. It believes that fear can erase conviction. It believes that if enough pressure is applied, faith will collapse. But the early Muslims proved the opposite. Their suffering purified them, their patience strengthened them, their wounds became testimony, and Abu Jahl, in trying to destroy Islam, only revealed why Islam had to prevail. Those who fight the truth with oppression may appear powerful for a moment, but their cruelty is already the beginning of their downfall. And then came the moment that history had been moving toward all along. After years of mockery, persecution, torture, and open hostility, the stage was finally set for a confrontation that would change the course of Islam forever. The Battle of Badr was not just another battle in Arabian history. It was not simply two groups meeting on a battlefield over strategy, trade, or tribal revenge. Badr was something far greater. Badr was the day when Allah separated truth from falsehood. It was the day when the arrogance of Quraysh would stand face to face with the sincerity of the believers. And standing at the front of that arrogance, as expected, was Abu Jahl. He came to Badr with all the confidence of a man who believed he could never lose. He came with numbers, with weapons, with reputation, with pride. The Muslims were small in number, poorly equipped, and outwardly outmatched. From a worldly perspective, there was no reason for them to win. And that is precisely what makes Badr such a profound lesson for every generation. Because Allah wanted the world to understand that victory does not come from numbers alone. Victory does not come from wealth alone. Victory does not come from status. It might actually cease to be real or military advantage. Victory comes from Allah. Abu Jahl could not see that. He was intoxicated by his own sense of superiority. Even when there were opportunities to avoid bloodshed, even when voices among Quraysh suggested turning back, Abu Jahl refused. Why? Because arrogance had now become destiny in his mind. He wanted a public display. He wanted the Arabs to hear that Quraysh marched out, crushed Muhammad letter F.E.A. and his followers, and returned triumphant. He wanted this battle not merely to be a victory, but a statement. He wanted Badr to become the final chapter of Islam. But what Abu Jahl intended as the burial ground of the believers became the burial ground of his own pride. On that day, the Muslims stood not because they had superior resources, but because they had certainty in Allah and loyalty to his messenger, letter F.D.F.A. They stood with trembling hands perhaps, but with hearts full of Iman. And as the battle unfolded, the power of Quraysh began to crack. The men who thought themselves untouchable began to fall. The ranks that looked invincible began to break. And somewhere in the chaos of that battlefield, the man who had spent years trying to crush the truth was himself brought down. Abu Jahl, the one who had mocked the believers, now lay defeated. Abu Jahl, the one who had terrorized the weak, now could not save himself. Abu Jahl, the one who came boasting of his power, now faced the reality that no power can stand against the decree of Allah. And what makes this even more remarkable is that the one who had towered over the Muslims with arrogance was struck down by those he would have considered insignificant. The tyrant who thought he could shape history discovered that history belongs only to Allah. Badr was not just a military victory, it was a spiritual declaration. It was Allah showing the world that truth may be tested, but it will not be extinguished. Falsehood may roar loudly, but it cannot survive forever. Abu Jahl came to Badr believing he would witness the end of Islam. Instead, Badr became the beginning of his own end, and the rise of a community that would carry La ilaha illallah across the world. The fall of Abu Jahl at Badr proved forever that no worldly power can stand against the decree of Allah. And when we now look back at the end of Abu Jahl, we realize that his death was never just the fall of one man on a battlefield. It was the collapse of a mindset. It was the breaking of an illusion. Because Abu Jahl represented something far bigger than his own name. He represented arrogance when it becomes so deeply rooted in the heart that a person can stare at the truth, recognize it, and still reject it. He represented oppression when power is used not to protect, but to crush. He represented pride when a person becomes so intoxicated with status and reputation that they would rather fight revelation than humble themselves before it. And that is why his end matters, not simply because he died at Badr, but because of what his life and death teach every generation that comes after him. Think about it. Abu Jahl had everything this world could offer in the eyes of his people. He had influence. He had authority. He had tribal strength. He had a voice that was heard in Makkah. When he spoke, people listened. When he opposed, others followed. By the standards of dunya, he looked successful. He looked untouchable. He looked like the kind of man history would remember as great. But what happened? In the end, all of that power could not save him. All of that status could not protect him. All of that pride could not rescue him from the decree of Allah. And this is one of the deepest lessons of his story. If a person has the world but loses the truth, then in reality he has nothing. And compare that to the believers. Many of them were weak in worldly terms. Some had no wealth. Some had no protection. Some had been tortured. Some had been mocked. Some had left behind their homes and families. Outwardly, they seemed small. But inwardly, they were giants, because they had what Abu Jahl never had: sincerity before Allah. They had humility. They had patience. They had iman, and history has a beautiful way of exposing what truly matters. The man who seemed powerful is remembered with shame, while the men and women who were once oppressed are remembered with honor. The tyrant is cursed by history, and the believers are elevated by it. This is why the story of Abu Jahl is not just a story for the past. It is a mirror for the present. Because Abu Jahl is not only a man who lived in Makkah 14 centuries ago. Abu Jahl is a warning. He is a warning to every heart that begins to worship its own ego. He is a warning to every soul that thinks status is greater than submission. He is a warning to every person who hears the truth but delays, resists, and hardens themselves because they cannot bear to surrender. The danger is not only in open disbelief. The danger is in the arrogance that can slowly poison the heart until a person no longer sees guidance as mercy, but as a threat. And so, when we say the end of Abu Jahl, we are not merely talking about the end of an enemy of Islam. We are talking about the end of arrogance, the end of tyranny, the end of the illusion that falsehood can overpower truth forever. His story began with pride, continued with oppression, and ended with humiliation. And that is how it always ends for those who knowingly wage war against the truth. Abu Jahl had power, wealth, and status, but he lost everything because he fought the truth. And his end remains a warning to every arrogant heart.